what's unique about what we do is not only understanding sexual abuse risk, but creating sexual abuse resources and tools. Ministry Safe and Abuse Prevention System have software to deliver those things, but in many ways, I'm a sexual abuse expert. Okay, I'm a one-trick pony. Okay, but part of the value in the conversations that Chris and I have been having, which is going to benefit a lot of the folks that are using Touchpoint, is that Touchpoint isn't just a one-trick operation. This is the full circus. And I'm really excited about the fact that we can take the excellence and resources that we've created and be able to deliver those through a quality platform that a lot of churches and ministries are already relying upon and using. So it's the idea of taking these resources and tools and equipping you to be able to deploy those in a way that's consistent with how you're doing the rest of the operations necessary in ministry. So I'm excited about that. I'll let Chris talk a little bit more about that ongoing way in which we're bringing those resources into this, resource delivery system of Touchpoint. But what I wanted to do is use a little bit of the time that we have together. Of course, I'd love to spend hours with you being able to unpack this and really get down into this so we can truly understand this risk. But what I really want to do is I just want to kind of meet you at a place where we can start a conversation. See, I've been doing this work as a sexual abuse lawyer for more than 30 years. And Kimberly Norris is not just my partner in the law firm, she's also my wife. So together, as civil trial lawyers, we've been wrestling with this, okay? Now, what that means as a civil trial lawyer engaged in sexual abuse work means I'm not a criminal prosecutor. You see, as a civil trial lawyer, I stand over train wrecks, okay? And generally, I'm invited to that train wreck by whether it's a victim's family, the Olympic Committee, an insurance carrier, denomination, church. When I stand over that train wreck as a civil trial lawyer, I'm going to bring with me a lens. Okay, and in the legal world, we call that standard of care. Just a snappy lawyer term for this is what you should be doing. Now, when I stand over a train wreck with that lens of this is what you should be doing, sadly, most of the times what I find is this is in fact what you were doing. And see, if there's a difference between what you should be doing and what you were in fact doing, that's what gives rise to liability. We call it negligence, gross negligence. Okay, so I've been standing over these train wrecks for more than 30 years. Okay, hundreds and hundreds of circumstances. But see, the advantage that brings to me that I can bring to you is I get to see the patterns of these train wrecks that most of my organizations don't get to see. To the extent they have one of these circumstances, it's something that's kind of blown up, and there are your set of facts, and it's hard to understand this risk just through the lens of one particular set of facts, usually when the adrenaline is charged and you've got people of yours that are in harm's way. So the benefit of standing over the train wrecks and seeing the patterns, and that's good news actually, don't miss that. Sexual abuse risk, especially in ministry, has a pattern. And here's how that works. If something has a pattern, that makes it predictable. And if something is predictable, it's preventable. And that's what I want to be able to show you a little bit of. I can't do as much as I'd like to in 40 minutes, but I want to at least kind of whet your appetite for an understanding and a desire to get into this information more deeply. All right? So, when I started doing this work in the early 90s, even those matters that I was dealing with, they themselves were 10, 15, 20 years old. So as we get to 2022, part of my challenge is so many ministries are waking up to this risk, waking up to the need to do something about it, recognizing that perhaps what they were doing before wasn't getting it done, oftentimes revealed by a crisis. But see, it's one of the questions that we see asked and answered but not answered well. So I'm going to help us answer a very important question. And here's the important question. Why does this continue to be a problem? Okay, why does this continue to dominate the headlines? Okay, it's like we have Boy Scouts of America, 82,000 claimants. That total package of resolutions so far is up to $2.7 billion. Headlines just last week in 2 Christian schools is school administrators were arrested for failure to report after children were victimized. Okay, notwithstanding, USA Gymnastics, Larry Nassar, just over and over and over. It's like, and it's the same patterns over and over and over. Okay, so here's the question I want to throw out there and just help us Prime the pump by answering this question: why does this continue to be a problem? Okay? The answer that I see from the perch on which I sit is, we're doing the wrong things. Okay? We're doing the wrong things. See, another way to say that is, our efforts are not related to the risk. Now imagine if I came into your church and I said, hey, what do you do here to protect children from sexual abuse? That sounded way too threatening. That's lawyer speak. Pretend I walked into your church with an 8-year-old and I asked you, hey, before I leave my 8-year-old with you and I go off to big church, what will you do to keep my child safe? You're never going to look at me and go, this is a bad week for kids. Would you think about coming back next week? I mean, you wouldn't tell me that. You want me to feel comfortable here. You'd look at me and you'd smile and you go, your child's going to be perfectly safe here. But what if I pressed you and said, well, what are you going to do to make sure my child's safe? Well, we're going to do criminal background checks. We have a child check-in system. We have a 6-month member rule. We have a 2-adult rule. We have video cameras in certain places in our physical plant. We have an officer that's on duty that's on Sunday morning and Wednesday nights. Okay, you're going to make for me what I call the Christian list. You're going to make the list of the things you do to satisfy me that my child is safe in your care. Okay, but what I'm here to tell you is that list that you just made me is not going to protect my child. This list is not related to how my child is going to come under attack. See, another way to say it is, we're building the wrong fence. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, y'all know what a fence is. You probably have one. Okay, but here's fence 101 for you. See, the type of fence you build is driven by what you want to keep out. Okay, so let's say you've got a garden. You've worked hard on your garden. You want to keep it safe. So you're going to build a protective barrier around it. Okay, but see, the type of protective barrier, the type of fence you build around that garden is driven by what you want to keep out of the garden. So say, for example, you want to keep your neighbor's livestock out of your garden. Okay, type of fence you build, driven by what you want to keep out. That type of fence might be metal stakes, barbed wire, hopefully close to a plug. All right, that barbed wire fence is perfectly acceptable at keeping your neighbor's livestock out of your garden. But see, watch this. Your barbed wire fence is absolutely worthless at keeping the bunnies out of your garden. And see, that's the problem that we see in the church. The church is building beautiful barbed wire fences while the bunnies are ripping our ministries. Okay? And that problem is compounded by the fact that we think we're fine. Now, how does that compound it? Okay, well, watch how this works. If you've got a barbed wire fence and the bunnies are ripping your garden, if you've built the wrong fence and you think you're fine, when are you ever going to make changes? Answer, you won't, unless one of two things happen. Number one, somebody gives you good information, or two, your failure is revealed in a crisis. Sadly, I have too many churches that are getting this learning curve in a crisis. But see, this is our opportunity to at least prime the pump, to invite you to good information, to evaluate what you're doing to protect children, and discern, do I have the right fence in place? Is it an effective fence based upon how my children are coming under attack? So, I'm submitting to you we're building the wrong fence. With more time, I would take that into lots more detail and different ways in which facts versus misconceptions get us into error. But I want to get real rifle shot with you, especially with a mind toward we're talking about a management software, a software that you want to pull features into to truly put together the correct fence unto the risk and potentially evaluate, what am I doing at present? If what the lawyer is saying is right, there's a good chance I need to evaluate my fence, and it's part of the system. In other words, not just my what, but my how I'm deploying those things. So I'm going to get really focused on the top misconceptions, and why that's important is, what I want to do real quick with you, since we're limited in time, is I want to check the back of the math book. Okay? Check the back of the math book. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, what's at the back of the math book? The answers are at the back of the book. Okay, so I remember in high school algebra, I had brain damage from that class. Okay, but saved my bacon in high school algebra is they gave me the answers at the back of the book. Now, The answers at the back of the book didn't teach me how to work the problem, but it was helpful to me to know here's where I'm supposed to land the plane. Okay, here's the answer in advance. So you see, if I'm going to work a hard problem, having the answer in advance is helpful because you see, I'll work a little harder. I'll struggle a little bit more, especially if I can see the answer starting to come into view. All right. Sexual abuse is a hard problem. So in checking the back of the math book, here's the answer at the back of the book, the grooming process. Okay, more specifically, the answer is the grooming process of the preferential offender. Now, if that's the first time you've ever heard that phrase, you have a barbed wire fence. Okay, we need to understand the answer at the back of the book is the grooming process. But if you're listening to me right now thinking, I got nothing yet, it's like, that's okay. All I've done is shown you the answer. I haven't worked the problem yet. But I'm going to work a piece of the problem to let you know sexual abuse is not voodoo. Okay? This stuff is knowable. I have so many people that are intimidated by this topic because it just feels like I'm never going to get this right. I'll never understand it. I'll never be successful at doing this. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. We can know this information and do the right things. But another observation I want to make is this. We're never going to accidentally get this right. Okay? We cannot reduce a risk we don't understand. And we don't understand child sexual abuse. All right? And I want to show you a little bit of the ways in which we don't understand it. And then I want to show you what information we need. But I want to start with a big idea. And here's the big idea. And all my church people can appreciate this. Watch how this works. What we believe shapes what we do. Okay? Not unlike the gospel. Okay? What we believe shapes what we do. See, the problem as I stand over train wrecks is not that we didn't love our children enough. The problem is that we believe wrong things or not enough of the right things. And watch how that works. If we believe wrong things, we do wrong things, and that gets me into predictable ditches. Part of my desire, part of our mission at Ministry Safe is I want to give you good information so we can do the right things and avoid those predictable ditches. So we spend, if we'd have had the time, or you were in one of my seminary classes, I would spend a great deal of time talking to you about here are the wrong pieces of information that we're holding on to and really help you understand and discern how each of those wrong pieces of information lead me into behavior that gets me into ditch-like experiences. But I want to be really rifle shot and I want to focus on two. Two of them that are probably, if you're part of this webinar, you're somebody that's in a management role, likely that person that's interacting with Touchpoint. So let's focus on the first one. One of the reasons why we're getting into the ditch, one of the misconceptions that we're holding on to is that this problem is solved with a criminal background check. Okay? The way I've phrased my statement of a misconception is we place a very heavy reliance on a criminal background check. Now, what's unique about my resume in terms of, what I do, I'm not just a sexual abuse lawyer. I'm also in ministry leadership. See, I'm also in my 28th year of student ministry at Christ Chapel Bible Church in Fort Worth. Okay, so this isn't just academic. This is stuff that I put to work. I see it in action. Okay, so in terms of how the church makes decisions, one of the ways we get into the ditch quickly is relying on a criminal background check to solve this problem. All right, we need some good information. Well, what is that good information? What we need to understand is as it relates to sexual abuse risk, less than 10% of sexual abusers will ever encounter the criminal justice system. Okay, less than 10%. Wait, we'll slow down. What does it mean, encounter the criminal justice system? Okay, well, the first step in having a criminal experience is getting arrested. Okay, that's the touch point that begins a record creation process. So what I'm telling you is that less than 10% of sexual abusers will ever be arrested. Okay, so what that means in practice is even if CSI Miami and Jack Bauer team up to do your background checks for you, more than 90% of the people that wish to hurt our children have no record for you to find, and they know it. Right now, I'm a background check provider. Okay, I understand that this is an important resource, but see, the error in this is that not that criminal background checks are broken, but the fact that criminal background checks are not the silver bullet most people believe it to be. See, I'm here to tell you that Criminal background checks, we have to do them. It just can't be the only thing we do. I remember teaching at a seminary class at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is in my hometown. And about 6 months later, I had a young man come up to my wife and I at dinner and said, "Hey, I know you don't remember me, but I was in your class." And that was some good information right there. In fact, I took that information back to our church leadership. We studied it and we voted and we saved $500 on our budget. I was like, "How'd you do that?" He goes, "We stopped doing background checks." I was like, "You're an idiot." Okay. See, I know we implied or stated that you should stop doing background checks. What I was trying to communicate to you, and I'm sure I did, is that background checks are here to stay. Okay. It's part of your standard of care. It's reasonable. It makes the list. It just can't be the only thing on your list. Okay. So we need to soberly understand what a criminal background check can and can't do for us. And in this places where we understand most ministry leaders are just poor background check consumers. Okay. Now we created a training, an online training that Chris and I are in discussion with in terms of how to make that information available. It's called Background Checks Removing the Mystery. It walks through how criminal records are created, how they're stored, how they're searched. It walks through stair-step offenses, plea down offenses, unique ways in which sexual abuse is a difficult topic as it relates to a criminal record. And then it talks about some of the federal and state laws that are going to further restrict what information you can even get if that information exists. And then how to create a strategy and best practices around this particular resource. Okay, so it's an important resource. We just need to soberly understand what it can and can't do for us and then move forward. Not the heavy reliance that most of my churches place on it. Now, this one people go, "Whoa, I wish this were more valuable than that." It's like, me too. Okay, but I need to take my environment as it exists and not how I want it to be. But see, when I go into that next misconception, this one I've seen people recalibrate their thinking and make a strategy forward. This next misconception actually is the trickiest one. All right, so here's the title of the misconception. Here's why this continues to be a problem. Sexual abusers have no visual profile. Okay, I'm going to say it again. Watch this. Sexual abusers have no visual profile. Now, I could say it several times, and I know from experience that I haven't helped you. Because, see, this misconception, this idea that there's a visual profile, is the natural way we do child protection. See, it's dyed into the fabric of our wool of just the way I do it. Okay? But see, the way I do it is going to fail me because sexual abusers have no visual profile. See, let me come at this a little different way. See, I remember, when I think back into my own childhood, I realize now looking back, I grew up in a high-risk home. Okay, and I didn't know that when I was a kid. Okay, I had a single mom, she had 3 boys, and we were wheels off crazy. Okay, she was working 2 jobs to try to make ends meet, and we were still living in the crummy apartment complex, all right? So even looking back into my life, realizing that circumstance was pretty sporty. Based upon what I know about sexual abuse risk, I was a high-risk kid. But when I look back into my experience and start asking the question, well, what principles, guidelines, or rules were my brothers and I rolling with to make sure we weren't hurt? And I remember this concept called stranger danger. Okay, stranger danger. First time I heard about stranger danger was I remember watching cartoons on Saturday morning, right between how a bill becomes a law and Conjunction Junction. Okay, and here's a little vignette with the little kids on the playground, and here comes the dirtbag with the trench coat, and he comes up to me and goes, "Will y'all help me find my puppy?" Okay, creepy as all get out. All the kids stand up and boldly and slowly yell, "Stranger danger!" The camera pans out. All the adults are like, "Hark," and they run to help, and the dirtbag runs away. The kids pretty cheesy, but I got it, right? I'm still looking for the kid who's ever yelled stranger danger. It never happened in my neighborhood. But putting that aside, just so you know, my generation didn't invent stranger danger. It's just the little jingle name we place on how we already do it. Okay, in fact, it's trying to bring the child into our already existing way in which we do child protection. All right, so this is the natural way we do it. It's the dyed in the fabric of our wool. But here's the question for you. Is stranger danger valuable? That's a very important question to ask and answer, because that's the foundation of how we do it even with our own children, and that's the foundation upon which we build our safety systems at our churches. Is stranger danger valuable? Let's look at that a little bit more closely. But before we come back and answer this question, here's what I want to do. I want to take you to some good information, then I want to take you to a fact pattern, then I want to come back to that question. And here's the information I want you to have. There are types of sexual abusers. There are types. Now that backs some people. It's like, what? Are you serious? There's types of them? It's like, yeah, there's 4 types. I want to contrast 2. And the type that's most familiar to us is what we call the abduction offender. Okay, now the abduction offender may have no relationship to the child or the child's family, simply grabs a child, white van, goes. Get the alerts to our phones, see it on the news. The story ends a few days later, and it's usually awful. Okay, the abduction offender. Now, on the waterfront of child sexual abuse risk, the abduction offender represents less than 10% of the problem. Less than 10%. Now, contrast that with the preferential offender, okay? And don't ever forget that word, preferential offender. Jerry Sandusky, preferential offender. Larry Nassar, preferential offender. Now, the preferential offender could be male or female, have an age-appropriate adult willing to have sex with him or her, but prefers a child as a sexual partner. It makes no sense to me. But see, it's not just any child. It's usually a child within an age and sex of preference. So Jerry Sandusky, boys ages 9 to 14. Larry Nassar, girls ages 10 to 15. Okay, so there's a narrowness to the deviance. Lots more can be said about that. But getting up to the waterfront of child sexual abuse risk, the preferential offender represents 90% of the problem. More than 90% of the problem. My brothers and sisters, that is our problem. Okay? But we'll come back to that. See, now what I want to do is take you to a fact pattern. I want you to kind of see it unfold in a negative way. Now, this is a particular church. It's a large church, multiple buildings on their campus. And they serve their very small children in what's called a horseshoe-shaped building. Okay? And there was a fence across the top of that horseshoe. And see, it created this courtyard area, a bunch of windows looking out, and see, that became the playground for the little kids. Okay, so there was a play structure, and in the base of that structure were these little panels that created these little boxy areas. So on one particular Sunday morning, with staff members sitting 20 feet away, 6-year-old boy wooed 4-year-old girl into one of those boxy structures and victimized that little girl. Now, she went home with her family, and at lunch, she's very withdrawn. Okay? They know something's wrong, but see, she lacks the vocabulary to describe what she's endured. Now, they work with her a little while, and they finally understand what's taken place, and they believed her, and don't think that always happens. Parents called church leadership. Church leadership called Kimberly and I. We got to that church playground that next Sunday morning, got there early. So the women were out there setting up the playground before the kids came out. Said, ladies, can we talk for just a moment, please? They were pleasant, said, of course. We need to talk to you about the sexual abuse situation that happened on your playground last week. See, both of them backed up and said, what? That's not possible. It's like, actually, it is possible, but tell me why you think that. And both of them said, because we have a fence. See, there it is. See, for both these women who love Jesus and love these children, where do they think risk comes from? Answer, outside the fence. So for them, as long as there was no ski mask, box cutters, or anybody trying to make the fence, it was a safe day in children's ministry. What they didn't know was that more than 90% of the risk happens on this side of the fence. And see, that's what I need my people to understand. But now I can go back to the question we have on the table. And with the information that I've given you, I can now ask you a better question. And here's the better question. Will stranger danger help you protect children from the abduction offender? Answer, perhaps. Will stranger danger help you protect children from the preferential offender? Answer, absolutely not. Okay, in fact, it will disserve you because it'll continue to reinforce this idea that there's a visual profile that's going to alert you to the danger. Okay, let's go into that list I asked you to make. We've talked about the background checks. What about your child check-in system? Will your child check-in system help you protect children from the abduction offender? Answer, perhaps. Will your child check-in system help you protect children from the preferential offender? Answer, absolutely not. Okay? And no offense to your child check-in system, it never was meant to. See, what we need to understand is there's two different types of risks. Most of the risk that you're going to describe your list is going to be your barbed wire fence related to the abduction offender. Now, is that an important fence? Absolutely, it's an important fence. I don't want the children to be abducted out of student ministry or children's ministry. So this very important fence is in most churches in place and working well. How do I know that? In 32 years of doing this work, I've yet to get the call of somebody saying a child got abducted from my children's ministry. Okay, what that tells me is you've got a barbed wire fence up. It's an important fence. You're doing a good job. You're killing it, in fact. Keep it up. But now, if I would have asked you this question, what are you doing at your church to protect children from the preferential offender? Now, when I've just straight up asked that question, I'll have people respond, I'm sorry, protect the who from the what? If you have no idea what I mean by that question, you have a barbed wire fence, okay? What we need to understand is that more than 90% of our risk is presented by the preferential offender, and most of my ministries don't know that there is a fence to build, don't know there's such a risk, and certainly don't have the fence in place to protect the children in their care. That's why this continues to be a problem. That's why we continue to have ditch-like experiences. But let's go ahead and take this a little further. Okay, it's Child Abuse Prevention Month. It's April. Hope you knew that. Okay, this is one of the common pieces of information we'll hear during Child Abuse Prevention Month. 90% of children are victimized by someone they know and trust. Because that someone they know and trust isn't the dirtbag with the trench coat and the Beanie Babies. The someone they know and trust is the preferential offender. Okay, and here's the big idea, the most important thing I'm going to say. Preferential offender is 90% of our problem. People, that's what's rocking our world. That's the bunny. But we cannot recognize this risk visually. Preferential offenders have no visual profile. We cannot recognize this risk visually. We must understand this risk behaviorally. Okay, begs the question, what are the behaviors? Grooming process of the preferential offender. Okay, starting to see the math book coming into view? All right, so let's put all the metaphors together. The type of fence you build is driven by what you want to keep out. I'm keeping out the abduction offender. Well done. I need to keep out the preferential offender, but the type of fence I build is driven by what? I can't recognize this risk visually. I must understand the behaviors, and that's the point. The type of fence you build is driven by an understanding of the grooming process of the preferential offender, recognizing that grooming looks different, whether it's a youth sport program, children's ministry, youth ministry, education, daycare center. All of it is grooming, but based upon the type of programs you offer, it's critically important to get a more granular understanding of grooming because, you see, I need to know how someone's going to give it a go. That's what helps me understand what protective barriers to put in place. Okay? But just to drill home that idea that sexual abuse, there's no visual profile, we can go to Penn State for Exhibit A. There's nothing about Jerry Sandusky that would have told you he was a problem. If you would have relied on a visual profile like they did, very smart people, you would have failed like they failed. Good news. If you'd have understood the grooming process of the male preferential offender, you would have clearly seen Jerry Sandusky as the problem he was 45 years ago. Larry Nassar. Nothing about him would have told you he was dangerous. World-class resume, visual profile, and background check would have failed you just like it failed them. Good news, if you'd have understood the grooming process of the preferential offender, you would have seen him as a problem 21 years ago, clearly. Now, keeping that misconception diamond turning, it's also important to point out that there is a female preferential offender. Now, this backs a lot of people. It's like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And that's right. Most of your people don't even have a category for there being a female molester. So we need to first start with even understanding there is such a risk. DOJ tells us it's not as significant as the risk from men, but it's a risk nonetheless. But see, this is a risk that we're statistically less likely to have, but statistically more likely to miss it. Training is critical. So especially driving home that point, no visual profile. It's especially important in trying to protect our young people from the female molester, someone like Heather, who is a teacher, which means she's educated and licensed. She also happened to be married and have a kid. But during the Bible camp, chose a 13-year-old boy as her special helper. And during that week of camp, conversation got a little sporty, touch got a little racy, and after the camp was over, she met him at his house for sex. Does that make any sense? Based on a visual profile? Absolutely not. It's mind-bending. But if you'd understood the grooming process, you would have seen this unfold. You would have had the barriers in place. That would have been the way to protect that 13-year-old boy. This gal was victimizing teenage girl. Same calculus. Visual profile fails you. Understanding the behaviors unto your protective barriers is what have protected that 13-year-old girl. And lastly, we need to know there's such a risk called peer-to-peer sexual abuse. Child with child inappropriate sexual behavior. Now, even before COVID, law enforcement told us, and consistent with the calls we get in my office, more than a 300% increase in the reports of peer-to-peer sexual abuse since 2008. And after the heated petri dish of having our children staying at home with the people that present the most risk, we haven't even begun to measure how this risk is going to grow. But just with that list in mind, watch how this works. Will your background check solve a peer-to-peer problem? Answers, no. What about your 6-month member rule? No. What about your child check-in system? No. Trick question, what about your 2-adult rule? Answer, it depends. Typical lawyer answer, depends on what? See, it depends on what your 2 adults know. See, on my horseshoe-shaped playground, I had a peer-to-peer situation, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And yes, 6-year-old and 4-year-old. Very young children engaged in very adult behavior, okay? But see, in that situation, I had 2 adults. But I had 2 adults who had no idea there was such a thing as a preferential offender or peer-to-peer sexual abuse. The only risk they understood was the abduction offender, and they were killing it as to that risk while the other one unfolded right on their playground. See, I could have had a 6-adult rule on that playground, and it would have made no difference, okay? Changing what people believe. That's why training, even Chris made that point, training is the starting point, not a strengthened background check, not a tighter, child check-in system. No more strands of barbed wire. The abduction offender is out. Keep a watch on that fence. Let's build this one. And the foundation of this one is training. What type of training? Training to understand the grooming process and its variations depending on the type of age and sex of child gathered in a particular program. No time here, but as a follow-up, I'm going to send everybody a sexual abuse awareness training link, which is going to walk you through this idea of grooming the child and grooming the gatekeepers. Gatekeepers being you and me, parents, coaches, teachers, youth workers, babysitters. Okay, what does grooming the gatekeeper look like as opposed to grooming the child? Okay, this is the type of information I want to give you in a way that's not just rapid fire, let's see how fast I can talk. But in that training, I'm going to walk you through that 4 steps of gaining access, how the preferential offender selects a child within the age and sex of preference, starts to introducing nudity and sexual touch and the barrier testing and erosion, and how the abuser keeps the child quiet. See, that's the foundational information that begins the conversation to build an effective safety system, but also the information necessary to provide to the people who wear your name tag so they can participate in your safety system. So this is where we need to take that deeper dive. But once we understand the grooming process, we understand we don't just stop there. There's plenty more for you in leadership to get acquainted with, because now we need to start strengthening not just the fence, but start to understand the different elements of a safety system. So here's some of examples of the things that we've created in very well-produced way, a sexual abuse awareness training. I'm going to send that to you. Or a church safety workshop. Okay, that's the 2.5-hour let's build a safety system training, and maybe you're the person who needs that. Skillful screening training. That's the training that's going to teach you how to screen, how to use an application, reference check, and interview such that it can gather the high-risk information about a preferential offender, which begs for a training in what are those high-risk indicators. that training about criminal background checks, how to create policies and procedures, and of course, the brand new parent training. Now, the parent training is something that we're pushing out all over the country and getting tens of thousands of views because we've made it free for the month of April, it being Child Abuse Prevention Month. So whether it's through your Ministry Safe system or even forget that, just go to ministrysafe.com/April and you'll find access to that 2-part parent training, which is changing lives all over the country. Because what we realize from training 50 to 70,000 staff members and volunteers every month online is part of the feedback is, hey, I'm better equipped to participate in this church's safety system, but that also made me a better parent. And I value that. In fact, I wanted my wife to see this, or my cousin, or my carpool at the soccer team. Parent training is a version of that communication meant for parents to help them protect their children. So all kinds of information because we are passionate about the fact that we will never accidentally get this right. It's going to take intentional effort. So part of the overview as we start to pivot this back to Chris and understanding, okay, we have technology, we have software, we need to build the correct fence. You've given me a list of a fence. In that church safety workshop, I'm going to walk you through the 5-part safety system. Sexual abuse awareness training is critically important. That's your foundational piece, and that's the first piece that we're going to be bringing through Touchpoint. The skillful screening, that's going to follow, but once again, we're going to have to find out how all the ones and zeros line up to be able to make that available to you through your Touchpoint experience. Criminal background check, working on that. Tailored policies and procedures is trying to find those policies. Now, there's several options because grooming looks different in an after-school mentoring program than it does in a children's ministry or in this overnight camp. The goal is to find that sample form which is closest to the glove that fits your hand, following the color-coded prompt to make it a really tight fit, because all of our forms are going to be written down and rooted in the grooming process and dovetail with the sexual abuse awareness training. So monitoring and oversight, from our system, that's the way we call it the sustainability. It's the snappy lawyer way of saying we have to do what we say we're doing. But if you have a relationship with Touchpoint, we're trying to hand that off to the full circus and just being able to plug these pieces in to give you the convenience of doing all your management, but to bring in the child safety pieces as well. So we can walk through in the church safety workshop how that safety system falls down in function, because some of your safety system happens when you're onboarding someone. Your application, reference check, interview, your criminal background check. But I would also tell you your awareness training is a perfect opportunity on the front side of your program to allow that person, if they have ill intent, send them the training link. Now, it's not like you're going to teach someone how to molest. They already know how to molest if they're a molester. But it is teaching them. Everybody already in your program, everybody already in your sheep pen has received the training so that this person can understand everybody in here has eyes to see and ears to hear. They have a mouth that speaks. They've received a training that's going to cover the facts versus misconceptions, abuser characteristics, grooming process, common grooming behaviors, peer-to-peer sexual abuse, impact of abuse on a child, and the importance of reporting, okay? That's what makes policies and procedures possible, giving people the why behind the what, all right? Much more I'd like to say about that, but in terms of how to access, those are some of the things that we're working on at Touchpoint. So stay tuned as we begin to roll some of these things out. If you need any of these elements in the meantime, we're happy to provide them to you independently, knowing that our goal is to make this as seamless through your Touchpoint experience to gather everything that we offer to be able to protect your children, because that's our mission, is protecting children and those who serve them. So with that being said, back to you, Chris, and beautiful Charlie.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gregory. Wow. I'm how do I even follow that? So there's 3 things that come to mind that I am extremely thankful for from this. One is your expertise in this field. And I can tell you, I don't have the stomach for it. I'm glad that you've probably been through the trenches and it's been hard, but I'm glad that there's someone like you that has the expertise to learn and be able to share your knowledge with others. Two, on a personal note, I just found out you are actually a leader at my sister and her family's church. And so my four nephews are in better hands because of your leadership there. So personally, I'm thankful for that. The third thing, my own church is on this call and is considering using Ministry Safe. As like many of you on the call, I would encourage you to check out the ministrysafe.com/April. Check out that link. Reach out to Ministry Safe for more information. This was extremely helpful, extremely great information. I want to cover something real quick, which is what is that integration going to look like with Touchpoint? So currently, we already have background check providers, but as Gregory mentioned, that is only a very small portion of keeping your children safe. We are going to be integrating with Ministry Safe's background checks, so you can have a seamless experience across the background check and the abuse prevention. The second part of it is that we are going to be integrating the abuse prevention training. So, and it'll work very similar to how our background checks work currently, where you can submit either one of two ways. You can submit via email by emailing the person, they fill out the consent and their PII on that form for the background check. For the abuse prevention training, you go to their profile and you select the class and you email them. They fill that out, and then the information will pull back into Touchpoint. And the beauty of that is that there will be search builder conditions where you can actually see who has gone through that training and who is approved to be a volunteer. And Gregory, you said that check-in labels will not, your check-in process will not prevent things. But I think the beauty of this integration is that because of the way we're setting up the abuse prevention training and our ability to do status flags, we actually have a tool that's actually available right now where you can actually, as part of the check-in process. So if you're not using check-in to check in your volunteers, I would encourage you to do that, because we have a way to print on that label, both if they have an approved background check and if they have an approved Ministry Safe, it can do, I think it's a check mark for a background check. So a very subtle little image on the label for a name tag for a volunteer. And it's a heart for Ministry Safe that will print on their label if they have an approved abuse prevention training. So it's a really great marrying of these two technologies that we're going to be able to provide that training through Touchpoint. And then the status flags will be able to actually display that on the check-in labels. So unfortunately, today we don't have time for Q&A. If you do have questions, we do encourage you to go to ministrysafe.com, reach out. There's going to be a follow-up email with some of these resources, and you can reply to that as well. But thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to Gregory for your knowledge and expertise that you've shared with us today. So really grateful for this partnership, and stay tuned. If people might be wondering about timelines. So this is in development right now. We plan to have this in testing in May, and we are going to get this out and in your hands as soon as possible. So if that can be May, we're going to get it out, but I would expect that it will probably land sometime in early June to be safe for that integration. So we will watch our blog. We will be sending emails about it as well. It'll be in our newsletter, but we're very excited about this partnership. And thank you again to Gregory and the Ministry Safe team. Have a great day, everyone.